Hi everyone. So I want to start talking about Sartre. In English it becomes Sartre, Sartre. If you're French, you do it better. If you're Parisian, even better still. Um, but Sartre is what you'll get here. So 1905 to 1980. Um, Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Simone de Beauvoir were wicked good buddies. They went through college together. They took their post, like baccalaureate exam to go to graduate school. This is how they did it in France, or maybe they still do. Uh, they scored 1, 2, and 3. I think it was Sartre, Beauvoir, Merleau-Ponty. They went to graduate school together. They graduated graduate school, and in their class they were 1, 2, 3. I think it was again Sartre, Beauvoir, Merleau-Ponty, something like this. Um, So these three, of those three, only Sartre makes it in the book. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, they call the philosopher of existence, and I would argue that he does more for that than maybe Sartre does. But we can figure that out. It's up to you. Plenty of ink has been spilled here. It's a thing to point to. Simone de Beauvoir does maybe less existentially oriented stuff, but it is that way. The reason that I would hesitate there for a moment is that Merleau-Ponty and Simone de Beauvoir understand themselves as phenomenologists. Sartre does too, but he takes this into existentialism more boldly than others might. So phenomenology. I think I said at the beginning of the class, if I didn't, I'm sure I did, so I'm going to just say I did, that existentialism comes to like maturity in phenomenology. Maturity theoretically, which is like to say abstractly. So existentialism becomes abstract in phenomenology. That would be silly. But there is a theoretical underpinning for discussing and being accountable to existentialism. Otherwise, we're just like in the moment and not thinking about, how the moment is the moment. So, or at least we can sort of tend that way, sort of cast off all sorts of other baggage, which I think Sartre does a little bit. Where for Heidegger, we are like determined by our language and our history. For Sartre, nope. Well, I mean, it almost seems that way. Like, if I choose not to be now, I'm not. It's a little harder than that, but where for Heidegger, it was something that you couldn't cast off no matter what. For Sartre, these things that constitute me don't determine me. But then again, like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Sartre, all four of these guys are the people that we've read for this existentialism course, and they're just like four different people, four different ideas. So, I mean, where they overlap and where they don't are, here and there, and lots of places where they don't overlap. So, always wanting to keep in mind that there's a diversity of things called existentialism, and also this, that two of the existentialists that we are reading are phenomenologists. Sartre is, and he takes from Husserl, he understands himself to be this way. So Husserl is like the underpinning of the hidden figure here that allows for this theoretical underpinning. And the most important issue, well, not the most important issue, but the most important issue among the most important issues in phenomenology is this idea of intentionality. And it's important to say something about this. We'll talk about it again when we talk about being in nothingness. But for Husserl, for Merleau-Ponty, like mad. For Husserl, sometimes Husserl can be called an idealist, and he's more like Sartre in this way. We'll see what I mean when we start talking about being in nothingness, where consciousness is like in the total power. And if consciousness is the total constituting power, then that's like idealism, right? So consciousness for Husserl, when he is at his best, I'll say, or for Merleau-Ponty, is not a thing unto itself that would then open up onto a world and then make it its world. Just as there's no such thing as a world, and then humans come along and go, oh, hey, there's a world. Let's study it and do science and stuff like that. It was just like there, and we can just look at it like it's there. No, consciousness is how humans are in the world. So if we do not discuss consciousness, we are not discussing humans. So for the longest time, there was like studies of existentialism and phenomenology. You couldn't even say consciousness. If you say consciousness, you were like laughed out of the room. I remember a footnote from a scholar of renowned, or at least somewhat renowned, saying in a footnote, but someplace in this article he mentions consciousness. So, it's not worthy of regard. Right? Don't even say it. It doesn't go away if you don't talk about it. And it's always there. So, I mean, it's like trying to talk about the shadow and not the thing that casts it. Right? So, got to talk about consciousness. And intentionality is always consciousness of. ... So consciousness is consciousness of ... with the ellipsis, right? Which means that it's not a period. Consciousness is consciousness of something. Always. Always. Maybe it's even plural things or amorphous things or very, very tightly focused things or just sort of in general, a sort of engagement of the horizon, like the stuff out there. But it's still for me. I'm here with this stuff. It's not like a concrete me arrives on the scene and then my consciousness shows up, or my consciousness shows up and then the concrete me, or whatever. All of these things are abstractions. So until we understand consciousness as it is engaging a world, we do not understand existence. And Sartre gets closer to this, but we'll see he maintains this sort of ideological distance. So the first thing we're going to do is look at his existentialism as a humanism, which is sort of like an ethics more than an ontology, where being and nothingness is more of an ontological look at the stuff that he talks about in humanism and existential as a humanism. So, all right, so humanism as an existentialism, or the humanism of existentialism. This could be read as a sort of capstone or like an umbrella essay about all of what existentialism is, but I think that, having gone through Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Heidegger, we would see that not everything fits. But, no surprise there. And some people don't fit at all. Some people fit here and there, and so forth. But nevertheless, Sartre does give us something like a general claim, something clear. And remember, he's like one of the first guys to say, I am an existentialist. The word begins in reference to Sartre's philosophy. From, I think, Jaspers. I mentioned that earlier at the beginning of the semester. So Jaspers calls them the philosophers of existence or existentialists or something like that. And that's where the term is coined. So, of course, it's prior to, it's after Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. But so he tries to explain what it is this thing is, this new philosophy, this relatively new philosophy, this philosophy of existence. And he says, like, the bumper sticker here is existence precedes essence. So that we are is prior to what we are. So what does that mean? Well, let's think about essences. And to get to his essences, to understand essences, he thinks about something made, right? Excuse me. So like a paper cutter. I want to make a paper cutter. Everything about the concrete paper cutter is determined before the paper cutter even is made, right? I got an idea how it's supposed to look, what's it supposed to be made of. I mean, it can't be made of some materials because it's supposed to cut things, right? So it's got to have these kinds of things. And um, how's it supposed to work? Where's it going to sit when I'm using it? Who's going to use it? I got to make it usable for like any human, right? Not just ones that are 8 foot tall and can bench press 1,000,006 pounds or something like this. It's got to be cut. Everyone can use it. So all of these things go into the idea of the paper cutter. Then I make the paper cutter. So the essence of the paper cutter is determined before there's even a paper cutter. Also, what makes is that a good paper cutter? Right? Well, is it doing the things that it was designed to do well? Has it sort of, matched those ideas for make and use and all of that and durability that we had in advance of putting it together? So what it is and whether or not it's a good one are answered before the first thing even shows up on the scene, right? So the best thing a paper cutter could ever do is be a good paper cutter, right? I mean, not that it could strive for anything more, but maybe we could use it for something else, smash an enemy over the head when they're running into the house, or paperweight or something, right? I don't know. I didn't put much thought into these examples. But, we could use it for something else if we wanted. But the thing is, it's going to be measured as a paper cutter. And as a paper cutter, the good and the bad of it will show up. Now, what about humans? Are we like this? Well, some would say that God created us. And I assume maybe this is a false assumption, that God created us like in a similar way. Or this is what I think Sartre's trying to say here, right? God created us in a similar way. What's it going to do? What do I want it to do? What's it going to do? How do I get it to do that? I'm going to make some flesh, make some soul, put some hair on the top, right? Or maybe not. Whatever else. The things that go into it. What is essential? What is it? We're going to make this thing. And then we can judge whether or not it's good or bad. So if a human is God made, I'm going to put some faith in there so that it can turn toward me and worship. I'm going to put some reason in there. Maybe I won't put any reason in there, or maybe I'll put reason in there to fool him or whatever like that. Or I can make him this way. I can make him that way. I'll make him a sinner. I'll make them not sinners, and then they could choose or something like that. All of this would go into the decision of how to make a human. Whatever. I put faith, reason, soul, free will, whatever. These are just some how would God make a human? But if God is dead, then all of those things that we said that God has made us with, go with it. Right? We do not have a maker, which means that we do not have an orientation given in advance. We are not a setup of things for the sake of which. We are not an accoutrement of tools for purposes and nothing else, right? If we were, we would be like the paper cutter, and the best we could do is function as a tool. The best we could do is function as the thing that we were made to function as, fulfill our essence. But Sartre says, remember, existence precedes essence. So prior to essence is existence. I live, and then I make myself. If God is dead, then so are those essences that we have attributed to ourselves as coming from a divine source. So he says existentialism is more coherent. One of his favorite, my favorite phrases from him, nothing is vouchsafed. There's no guarantees. That is to say that with the end of essences, so is the end of any sort of certainty. I don't know if I'm matching the thing that I am, because I'm not a thing. Am I doing this right? There's no answer there because there's no program for me to follow. The paper cutter, am I doing this right? Yeah or no? Because it's got an outcome. Me, am I doing this right? There is no outcome that is measured like that. So I I have to like make my own outcome without measure, with and no values vouchsafed, nothing, no absolutes, no home base, no if even in the face of everything else, I can be sure of at least this. There's no this to be sure of. With the death of God goes all essences, all certainties, all all things that would be reassuring and enduring. I'm rhyming and I like it. So he says, man, sick. This is his language in translation to, I'm just going to stick with it, but excuse the gender specificity. Man is not prior to being man. Man appears, he shows up on the scene, and then he creates himself. Then he makes himself. Now, for those of us who've read Heidegger, I mean, we'd be like, this sort of self-making thing is to understand ourselves, Dasein, as equipment. I'm a thing for self-making. What Sartre's going to say is that prior to even there being equipment, there's an openness to the world that can sort of eschew equipmentality. And, we'll have to put them in a ring and have them duke it out, Heidegger and Sartre. But we'll get to that. Let's see. So, freedom is total. Man is nothing but what he makes himself. Man is a situation with a future. So this is like Heidegger too. I mean, we are with the past we have a situation. A sort of the engagements that we are in now, and with those are a projection. So it starts with Heidegger like this, but then he says man is will. We are will. So like we are freedom. And that's where he breaks from Heidegger. So we are not a sort of ability to step out of history. For Heidegger, the self-understanding, even understanding ourselves as a thing of will, is from the they. Sartre thinks that we can sort of even bracket that and understand ourselves in a way that is prior to equipmentality and language, prior to equipmentality and the they. Let's see. So there's also this idea in Sartre that I choose, and not only is my freedom total, but my responsibility. Okay, so my responsibility is total. So I choose for humanity. Now, this I want to clarify this, but these are some of the things he says. So I choose universally. I choose what humanity will be. My actions involve everyone. My actions include everyone. How and why? It's not like, how can me doing this right here? How is this doing something that institutes all of humanity? How is something like this creating and involving all of humanity? It's not by like a side-by-side relationship, that, like 6 degrees of separation kind of thing, like, Matt knows Pete knows Tom knows Harry, and therefore it comes right back around to me, and that's why we all know each other, and there it is. This isn't what he means. I mean, even if there is something to that, this isn't what he's talking about. What happens here? Everything I do, this particular guy. So even if I'm in this, whatever situations I'm constituted by, and here's Sartre's understanding of freedom, no matter those things that sort of impinge on me, make me the thing that I am, whether I like it or not, it's still this thing right here that has to choose to live that way or maybe do something else. So it's always mine, but everything I do also, like 2 things right here. Do you see them? 2 things. 1, 2. Me, human. I'm 2 things right here. An individual and a human. So you remember in Kierkegaard there was the universal and the individual. There's the particular, the universal and the individual. Maybe something like that. But right here all at the same time. I'm individual and universal. borrowing a phrase from Hegel, the concrete universal, right? And I think that we can find this a lot in Marx too, species being. You can find it there in the estranged labor stuff for sure, easily. Also in the Grundrisse and Capital and elsewhere. But concrete universal. Everything I do, a human does. So I sort of set the bar for humanity. Every one of my actions is something like this. Here's what a human should do here. Right? Every one of my actions is something like, this is what a human does. Everything I do is what a human does. So I am creating humanity while I create myself. Am I augmenting humanity while I augment myself? Am I diminishing humanity by self-diminution? So on and so forth like this. But because everything that I do is at once something that a human does, I am constantly reinstituting humanity. Even if it's sitting on the couch eating Doritos, it's like, here's what humans should do, right? So I am constantly giving the bar, giving the measure, giving the essence to humanity, which, because I exist, essence into being, right? I exist in meaning into being, which means that I keep doing it all the time. So I keep constantly recreating humanity, even if it's, a downward slope, like of possibilities and so forth. So